Did you get your coffee? Get comfortable, because today's story is one of those that slips under your skin and takes up residence in your heart. Welcome to A Coffee and a Story. Today, we travel to the sun-scorched plains of West Texas, where the earth is red and the sun holds the secrets of those daring enough to live beneath its reign. This is the story of Hector, a man whose love was as fierce as the drought, and whose hope had to be tougher than the prickly pear. A story that'll break your heart, yet remind you that in the end, love is the only harvest that truly matters. If this journey touches your soul, don't forget to hit that thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Every shared coffee is a thread that binds us in this tapestry of stories. Now, close your eyes for a moment and let me take you to the scent of rain-soaked earth after the first storm. Deep in the heart of West Texas, where the horizon is painted in shades of ochre, dust gray, and the relentless blue of the sky, lived Hector. His town, a scattering of adobe houses with sun-baked clay roofs, seemed not built by human hands, but born from the breath of the land itself. It was a place where time flowed with the slow sweetness of wild honey. Hector's childhood was not made of toys, but of sensations. It was the heat of the sun burning his bare feet on the cracked earth. It was the tart taste of wild persimmons picked in the backyard. It was the sound of the church bell that not only called people to Sunday service, but marked every birth, every wedding, and every farewell in that small corner of the world. His days were a double lesson. In the mornings, in the one-room schoolhouse, the letters of the alphabet and multiplication tables wrestled in his mind with fatigue and the longing to be outside free. But it was in the afternoons that his real education took place. In his father's fields, his small, calloused hands learned the silent language of the land. They learned to feel, right at their fingertips, the exact moment to bury a corn seed. They learned to hear the earth's sigh of relief when the first drop of rain fell after months of dry spell. They learned that life here was a fragile daily pact with nature. But Hector's true sanctuary, the place where his spirit truly rested, was his father Joseph's workshop. It was a simple shed behind the house, where golden sawdust danced in sunbeams streaming through the cracks. The scent in that place was his first prayer, the sharp, sweet smell of mesquite being cut, the deep, woody fragrance of pecan, and above it all, the smell of varnish, sealing not just the wood, but also promises. It was there, among chisels, planes, and mallets, that Joseph, a man of few words, his hands like maps of a life of labor, passed down the craft that had run in their blood for generations. Emphasis, woodworking. "A piece of furniture, son," Joseph would say, his voice rough like the bark of a live oak, while his calloused hands knowingly stroked a piece of Osage orange wood as if it were the face of an old friend. It ain't just wood nailed together. It's patience. It's knowing how to wait for the plank to dry just right. It's respect. It's honoring the tree that gave its life for this. And above all, Hector, it's leaving a piece of your own story in every cut, every joint, every polish. We don't just make furniture, son. We embed soul into wood. And Hector learned. He didn't just learn to join pieces. He learned to listen to the wood. He learned that cedar accepted gentle curves, that ironwood was stubborn and hard, but lasted forever. Under his fingers, no longer those of a boy, a rough block of mesquite turned into a chair strong enough to withstand generations. A piece of pecan became a hope chest, meant to hold the secrets and dreams of a bride. Life in the town was a constant balance between shared joy and personal hardship. Joy erupted during the county fair, when the center roasted corn and peanut brittle filled the air, and the sound of a fiddle made even the oldest folks tap their feet on the hard-packed dirt. On those nights, everyone was family, bound together by the warmth of the bonfire and a shared longing for a future that might be better. But joy was a fleeting bloom. The specter of drought was a permanent resident. Summer stretched on, endless, and the corn cribs sometimes stood empty. Water, a treasure beyond measure, was counted drop by drop. Hector grew up understanding, deep in his bones, that life on that land was a work of carving out survival, day after day, a slow, persistent carving, much like the work he did with wood. And it was in this world of contrasts, between dust and celebration, drought and resilience, that a new feeling began to sprout in Hector's chest, a feeling that didn't depend on the rain, but could create its own springs, a feeling that one day took the definite shape of a young woman with long braids, a simple dress, and a smile that to Hector held the unique power of bringing the scent of the season's first rain. Lucy.
It was at the county fair, with the whole town dressed in color and the air thick with the scent of bonfire and cornbread, that his path crossed hers forever. Hector saw her dancing in the square dance. It wasn't just any dance. Her feet seemed to glide lightly over the earth. Her skirt twirled, and the colored ribbons in her hair danced like butterflies around her face, glowing in the firelight. It was Lucy. Timid, his hands still marked by the calluses from the plane, he approached, his heart beating so hard it seemed to want to escape his chest. In his hand, he carried a small wooden figure, a bird, a sparrow, which he had carved during the long afternoons of waiting, thinking of her without even knowing it. He held out his hand. "It's for you," he murmured, feeling that those three simple words were the bravest he had ever spoken in his life. Lucy stopped dancing. Her large, dark eyes met his. She took the little wooden bird with a tenderness that moved Hector deeply, and her fingers brushed his for a moment that to him felt like eternity. "It's beautiful," she whispered, "but why a bird?" A shy smile touched Hector's lips, because sparrows always return to where they're born, no matter how far they fly. And in that moment, looking at her in the golden glow of the bonfire, he made a silent promise, a promise that went far beyond words. From that day on, Hector's world took on new colors. Summers felt less scorching. The stars shone brighter. Their secret meetings by the creek, when he could slip away from the wood shop, the notes exchanged in secret, the glances they shared during Sunday service like magnets drawn together. Every moment with Lucy was a treasure he guarded with the care of someone saving the last water in a drought. He worked in his father's workshop with renewed passion. Every movement of the chisel, every strike of the hammer was dedicated to a future he imagined solid and beautiful enough to deserve her. He could already see the house he would build for them, the furniture he would craft with his own hands, her smile filling every room with light. But the horizon of his dreams began to darken. News from afar spoke of conflict and uprising in a place called the border, calling for young men. The government wanted soldiers. The Plains would send their sons to die in another land. One afternoon, he asked her to meet beneath the old mesquite tree on the hill, the sacred tree that had witnessed the birth and growth of every generation in the town. The shade of the mesquite was cool, but the air between them felt heavy. "I have to go, Lucy," he said, the pain in his voice so palpable the air seemed to grow cold around him. "I'm going to the border." Silence settled between them, broken only by the rustle of the mesquite's fine leaves. Lucy pressed the wooden bird to her chest. She didn't cry. Her serious eyes pierced his. "Come back," she whispered. And in that single word lay all the fear and all the hope in the world. "Even if I have to walk through fire," he vowed, taking her hands in his. They were small, strong hands, hands that knew hard work and now trembled in his. "Come back to me, Hector. I'll wait for you." And there, beneath the sacred shade of the mesquite tree, with the scent of earth and brush in the air, they sealed a pact they believed was stronger than war and greater than the distance that lay ahead. A promise the prairie wind would carry, one that would cross the river and be tested on the battlefields of the border.
The autumn of 1896 brought with it a colder, drier wind and a letter with an official seal that trembled in Hector's hands. The nation was at war with itself at the border, and his name, like so many other young men from the plains, had been marked by the pen of duty. The farewell on the dirt road was a silent tear in the soul of that place. His mother, Mary, wiped her tears with the hem of her dress, her lips whispering a prayer carried away by the wind. His father, Joseph, his gaze lost somewhere on the horizon, gripped his shoulder with a strength that said more than 1,000 words. "Take care of yourself, son," was all he could utter. But in his eyes, Hector read pride and fear locked in a silent battle. But it was the image of Lucy, pale and serious, that burned itself into his memory. She approached and handed him back the small wooden sparrow. "Take it with you," she whispered, her voice almost vanishing. "So it reminds you there's a nest waiting for you here." Her fingers intertwined with his one last time, a fleeting touch that needed to last an eternity. The old military truck that would carry him and the other recruits rumbled away, its engine roaring against the silence of the plains. Hector, squeezed between sweaty bodies and cardboard suitcases, watched his town, its red earth and adobe houses, fade behind him, turning into a blur of dust and longing. The days of travel were a slow mourning toward the unknown. The familiar landscape gave way to dusty roads and then to larger towns, a gray, noisy world that was not his. The same truck, now on paved roads, was a wooden cage rattling, taking him farther and farther from everything he loved. The barracks were a prison of bare walls and shouted orders. There, hundreds of men like him were crammed together, their fear disguised as bravado, the same uncertainty stamped on their faces. The conversations were whispers about the border, the fighting, the enemy, Antonio the preacher and his armed followers. At night, when the sounds of other recruits' groanings mixed with his own nightmares, Hector would take out the wooden sparrow and stroke it in the dark. It was his only anchor to sanity in that ocean of uncertainty. He carved small notches at its base with his fingernail, marking the days, turning the object into a map of his patience. In his worst moments, he closed his eyes and traveled back to his father's workshop. The smell of fresh mesquite sawdust, the sound of the planes smoothing wood, Joseph's calm voice explaining the secrets of ironwood. These memories became his mental refuge, a shield against the fear that grew with each day, bringing him closer to the front. "I'll come back," he whispered into the dark wind coming through the window, "even if I have to walk through fire." The silence of the night seemed to answer with an icy skepticism. And what if the fire consumes you, Plainsman? What if the war enters your soul and never leaves?
The first impact with the ground at the border was a shock. The air, hot and thick with a fine dust that clung to the throat, was unlike anything Hector had ever breathed. This was nothing like the plains he knew. It wasn't the fertile soil of the valleys, but a scene from another world, harsh, hostile, bathed in a sun that didn't warm but punished. Training wasn't a school of discipline, it was a factory of fear. The instructors, veterans with hardened faces and empty eyes, taught them how to disassemble a rifle, dig a trench, and kill. But no one taught them how to live with the terror that settled deep inside them each night when the silence of the plains filled with rumors and shadows. It was there that he met Michael, a young man from Lubbock with an easy smile and eyes that still held a glimmer of light. They became brothers in that hell of earth and stone. Together, they shared scarce water, letters from home and fear. Michael spoke of his family, his father's store. Hector showed him the wooden sparrow and told him about Lucy. In their voices, the plains of Texas and the hills merged into the same longing to return. But war is a devourer of dreams. One confused dawn, during a skirmish near the settlement, the whistle of a bullet turned into a muffled cry. Michael fell beside him, his eyes wide, staring at a sky he could no longer see. Blood stained the earth, red and obscene. Hector held him helpless as his friend's life slipped through his fingers. "Write to my mother," were Michael's last whispers. Those words etched themselves into Hector's soul deeper than any scar. From that day on, something broke inside him. The war was no longer a distant adventure. It was the blood of a friend on his hands, the weight of a promise made to a mother he would never meet. Every dawn was a macabre lottery. He watched boys from his unit, with whom he had shared the journey, fall like shattered dolls. He saw horror in all its forms, and in the midst of that chaos, only two things kept him sane: the cold rage of someone who knew he had to survive, and the image of Lucy,
which became his beacon, his prayer, his only reason not to give up. At night, under a blanket of stars that seemed indifferent to his suffering, he carved small marks into the wooden sparrow. Each one was one day less, one day closer to home, one day closer to her.
Amidst the hail of the border, Lucy's letters arrived like miracles. They were folded, crumpled papers, sometimes stained with sweat and travel, but to Hector, they carried the pure air of the plains that saw him born. Each one was a treasure he read and reread until he memorized every stroke of her handwriting, until he could imagine her voice whispering each word in his ear. "My dearest Hector," one of them began, "winter has passed and the mesquite tree where we said goodbye still stands strong, resilient. Your father says this year's pecan wood is the best he's ever seen, but all I can think is that it will be perfect for the future we will build together." Hector replied from the trenches, with the sound of gunfire and shouts as witnesses to his love. He wrote about the cold of dawn, not the comforting chill of the evening dew, but abiding cold. He wrote of a hunger that didn't taste like his mother's bean stew, and of a fear that could only be fought by remembering her face. "My dearest Lucy," he wrote one night, "today was another day of survival, but the memory of you is my personal trench, a place where no evil can reach me. I hold the wooden sparrow you gave me and close my eyes. Suddenly, I'm no longer in this war-torn land. I'm with you, sitting on the doorstep of our home, and your smile is my only sun." The correspondence was a fragile bridge over an abyss of uncertainty. Sometimes letters were lost or arrived weeks late. When a new one reached his hands, Hector would isolate himself from the world. He'd open the envelope with trembling hands, devouring every word as if it were fresh air. In one letter, Lucy wrote something that filled him with renewed strength. "The town feels emptier without you, but every night I look up at the same stars you must be seeing, and I know that somewhere under this same sky you are alive and fighting to return to me. Don't let this war steal your hope, my love, because here I'm waiting for you, and my hope is greater than any battle." Those words became his armor. As he carved another mark into the wooden sparrow, he whispered, "1,001 nights left, Lucy, 1,001, and then my feet will walk again on the land that saw us born." 3 years. 1,095 days. That's how long the absence lasted. When Hector finally stepped back onto the dusty yard of his hometown, he was a different man. He wore worn-out clothes, carried a light bag, and bore the weight of a silence he didn't know how to break. His eyes, once full of the serene light of the plains, now captured every movement with the quick distrust of someone who had learned to survive. The plains welcomed him with their mantle of warm colors and familiar heat, but the return wasn't easy. In the village, things had changed. His younger sister, the girl he remembered chasing chickens, was now a married woman with a child in her arms. His father, Joseph, seemed to have shrunk. The years and worry were etched into his back, which now curved a little more. And his mother? In his mother Mary's eyes, he saw the reflection of his own sleepless nights. But the hardest reunion was with Lucy. He asked her to meet him under the same mesquite tree. She arrived with her familiar walk,
but with a new caution. He, with hands now rougher and marked, attempted a smile that came out crooked. "Lucy," was all he managed to say. She looked at him, and for a terrible moment, Hector saw in her eyes that she didn't recognize the young man who had left. She recognized the man who returned, yes, but there was a chasm between them. "Your eyes," she whispered, "they have a shadow that wasn't there before." He lowered his gaze. How to explain that the shadow was the dust of the border? It was Michael. It was the friends who would never return. Instead of words, he pulled out the wooden sparrow. It was worn, marked by hundreds of small grooves, but intact. She took it in her hands and for the first time truly smiled. "You came back," she said, and in that phrase lay all the relief in the world.
They married on an April day, when the plains sun was beginning to burn, but the morning wind still carried a lingering coolness. The wedding was simple, in the same little white church where Hector had been baptized. Lucy wore a borrowed dress and hid the wooden sparrow in her bouquet of wildflowers. He, wearing his father's old suit, saw in her eyes the same mixture of happiness and fear that he felt. There was no banquet, no honeymoon. Their wedding night was a walk to the top of the ridge where they could see the sleeping town below and the vast blanket of stars in the plain sky. There, with the silence of the night as their witness, they vowed to love each other beyond the distance that was coming. "Wherever I go," Hector whispered, "I'll only be half a man if you're not by my side." Lucy squeezed his hand. She didn't need to say more. The decision was made. Hector would go to Chicago. A distant cousin already in the city had secured him work on a major construction project. It was the only way to break the cycle of poverty that suffocated their town. The weeks that followed were a race against time. The documents, the farewell to his parents, selling the few belongings that could be converted into money for the trip. And then, on the eve of his departure, it happened. They were sitting on the wooden bench in front of the house watching the sunset. Lucy took his hand and gently placed it on her abdomen. "I won't be alone," she whispered, tears shining in her eyes. "I carry our child here inside." Hector felt the world stop. A wave of joy so fierce it buckled his spine, followed by a pain so sharp it stole his breath. He was gonna be a father, and he was gonna miss his child's first steps, first word, first laugh. "You have to come back," Lucy said, with a strength he didn't know she possessed. "Not just for me, now for the three of us." The next day, at the same spot where the old military truck had waited for him years before, the farewell was different. It was no longer the goodbye of two young lovers, but the separation of a family that had barely begun. "Name him Ethan if it's a boy," Hector requested, holding Lucy as if the world was ending. "Ethan, like my grandfather." The truck engine revved, a harsh, heart-wrenching growl. Hector climbed into the back without looking back. He couldn't. If he saw Lucy, small and vulnerable in the dust, her hands protecting the womb where their future grew, he would never have the courage to leave. The truck began to move, its human cargo swaying with the bumps of the dirt road. The plains became a blurred line on the horizon. Hector clung to the wooden side, watching the vultures circling in the sky, wondering if any of them could find their way back home, like he would have to, like he must.
The old military truck was a cage of wood and fraying wire, lurching across the red dirt, leaving behind a trail of dust and longing. Hector, wedged between other men with tired faces and distant eyes, felt every bump in the dirt road like a direct blow to his chest. This wasn't a journey, it was a forced exile. Around him, a small colony of migrants, plainsmen, and dreamers shared the same fate. Men with calloused hands and their eyes set on a Chicago that existed only in the promises of those who had gone before. The conversations inside the truck were a mosaic of hopes and fears. "In Chicago, there's work that never ends," said an older man, his face etched by the sun. "Construction sites everywhere, factories needing strong arms. My cousin said they even have electric light in the city," commented a younger boy, a gleam of anxiety in his eyes. Hector listened in silence, his hands, made for the precise work of woodworking, gripped the edge of the truck bed tightly. It wasn't the hard work he feared, it was the time that would steal from him the sight of Lucy's growing belly, the time during which she would bear alone the weight of waiting and preparing for their child's birth. After long days, the truck reached a larger town where a railroad station buzzed with life. It was from here he would continue by train to the industrial Midwest. Swapping one precarious transport for another, slightly more comfortable one, did nothing to ease the weight in his heart. Inside the train car, through the nights, the roar of the engine and the cry of a few children became a constant lament to the distance. He would take out a notebook and by the dim light from the aisle, write. They were letters he couldn't send, words trapped between the plains and Chicago.
The great central station in Chicago was a human anthill that assaulted all of Hector's senses. The air, thick with smoke, sweat, and the sickly sweet smell of overripe fruit, was a mixture of despair and promise. Men with hurried faces and starched suits rushed past him, while others, with the same lost expressions and dusty country clothes, huddled together, seeking direction. The voices, in a fast, unfamiliar accent he barely understood, sounded like a code he needed to crack to survive. The Promised Land was, first and foremost, a city of violent contrasts. Towering buildings that seemed to scrape the sky would transform, just around a corner, into dirt roads with wooden shacks. The noise was constant. The clatter of the L train, the honking of cars, the shouts of newsboys, and the incessant chatter. The Chicago sun, unlike the clear sun of the plains, was heavy, gray, filtered through factory smoke. His first refuge was a boarding house in a working-class neighborhood recommended by a fellow countryman, a room at the back of a tenement shared with 3 other men. The smell of mold and boiled cabbage was his new scent. Among the Southerners and Midwesterners living there, he found his first jobs, unloading bags of cement at a construction site, pushing wheelbarrows full of rubble. His woodworking hands, made for detail and precision, became covered in calluses and cracks. "Gotta start at the bottom here, Hector," said an older man from Kentucky, Raymond, who had been in the city for 10 years. But a hard-working, honest man finds his way eventually. Hector nodded silently. At night, on his thin mattress on the tenement floor, he wrote letters to Lucy. He lied with hope. My dearest Lucy, Chicago is a city that never stops. I got a good job on a big building site. The crew is good and the foreman is fair. The weather is cooler, but I'm getting used to it. I think of you and Ethan every minute. He didn't write about the hunger he sometimes felt, the 12-hour shifts, or the look of disdain from some Chicagoans who saw him as just another hick. No, that part of the truth would not travel in his letters. Instead, he closed his eyes and clung to the image of Lucy resting in the shade, a picture he drew in his mind with such detail he could almost touch it. One day, Raymond took him to a work site in an industrial district. The foreman, impressed by the quiet strength and dedication of the Plainsman, asked him, "Hey, you know how to do any skilled work?" "I'm a carpenter," Hector replied, a flicker of pride in his eyes for the first time since he'd arrived. A good one. That simple phrase, that reclaiming of the essence of who he was, earned him a new position. He would no longer just carry sacks. He would wield a hammer and chisel again. That night, for the first time since he'd stepped off the train, Hector wrote a letter without needing to lie. My dearest Lucy, fate gave us a sign today. I will be working in my trade. Every nail I drive will be one less step between us.
The carpentry shop in the industrial district became Hector's new world. The scent of pine and cedar replaced the cement dust, and his hands finally felt the familiar texture of wood again. Under his care, rough planks transformed into door frames, cabinets that would hold other people's stories, and tables that would become the center of future homes. That boy from the plains has a gift in his hands, commented the master carpenter, Mr. Al, watching Hector put the final touches on a walnut dresser. But the path wasn't easy. His days began before dawn and stretched until the natural light faded. The pay, though better than in construction, was still meager. Every penny he saved was another brick in the house he dreamed of building for Lucy and Ethan. Lucy's letters were his fuel. They spoke of a boy growing up healthy, who was already crawling, who said mama, and who, in the photos she managed to send, had his very own eyes. Ethan asks about his father every day. He points to your picture and laughs. He has your same smile, Hector, wide and sincere. The town remains the same, but your mother helps me with everything. We are waiting, my love. We wait with a patience that only true love can give. These words gave him the strength to bear the weight of loneliness. While his companions spent their earnings in bars and gambling, Hector saved money on the very air he breathed. It wasn't greed, it was love transformed into sacrifice. 2 years of tireless work passed. Hector, now respected for his talent, began taking on small jobs on the side. A bookshelf for a family, a counter for a grocery store. His reputation grew. The quality of his work spoke for him. It was then that Mr. Al, now elderly, made him a proposal that would change his life. Hector, I'm retiring and moving back to the old country. My workshop, the tools, the clientele, it could all be yours. I know your story.
I know every nail you drive is to get back to your family. I'll sell you the business for a fair price." Hector held his breath. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for. With the workshop, he could earn enough to bring his family to him. That night, he counted his savings down to the last cent. It wasn't quite enough, but he was close, so close. He wrote Lucy a letter filled with a tangible hope, one he could finally touch with his fingers. "Our dream is closer, Lucy. I found the key that will open our door. Soon, very soon, I will stop writing letters and start living by your side every day. Ethan will know his father, and I will finally be able to hold you both."
Mr. Owl's workshop now had a new owner. Every tool, every workbench, every wood shaven on the floor belonged to Hector. He worked with a dedication that bordered on obsession. He was no longer just a carpenter. He was the owner, the manager, and the soul of a business that began to flourish under his hands. Months passed, and his fame as the Plainsman carpenter grew. His talent and his firm word, "What I promise I deliver," set him apart in a sea of competition. The workshop began to turn a profit, and for the first time, the future stopped being a distant dream and became a reachable horizon. It was during this time of prosperity that an idea began to germinate in his mind. An idea that had matured during long conversations with other transplants from the South and Midwest at the boarding house. "You know what's missing here," he commented one day to his friend Raymond, "is a place that tastes like home, where a man from the plains can get a sweet tea, eat some proper cornbread, and feel for a moment like he's back home. And where a city fella," Raymond added, "can taste those flavors and understand why we have such big hearts." And so, the Plainsman's Hearth was born, a small eatery in a room at the back of the workshop. Hector invested all his remaining savings into the venture. He himself designed and built the counter, the tables, and the chairs using Midwestern woods, but with the soul and style of the old workshops back home. On the door, he proudly nailed the wooden sparrow Lucy had given him. Success was immediate, not just for homesick folks from the plains, but for curious Chicagoans too. The place smelled like home, like tradition, like memories transformed into flavor. Hector, with his gift for connecting with people and his story of overcoming adversity, became the heart of the place. He learned to balance work in the workshop in the mornings and at the eatery in the afternoons. Finally, after 6 long years of work, sacrifice, and sleepless nights, the day arrived. With his account book spread over the counter of his own establishment under the watchful gaze of the wooden sparrow, he added up his savings one last time. The number was clear, solid, and sufficient. Sufficient for the trip back home. Sufficient to build a proper house. Sufficient, finally, to keep his promise. That night he wrote the most important letter of his life. "My dearest Lucy, my love, pack your bags. I'm finally coming home." The train pulled into the dusty station of the town under an intensely blue sky, as if the plains themselves had decided to dress up for the occasion. Hector, stepping onto the platform, couldn't tear his eyes away from the landscape. 6 years, 6 long years echoed in his chest with every beat of his heart. When his feet touched the hard-packed earth, his gaze searched anxiously among the few people waiting. And there they were, Lucy, more a woman now, with a serenity in her face that hadn't been there before, and beside her a 5-year-old boy with his own eyes and unruly hair, Ethan. As he approached, his legs almost gave way. Lucy took a step forward, tears streaming down her face. "You came back," she whispered, and in that simple phrase lay 1,000 sleepless nights, 1,000 letters written, 1,000 dreams deferred. "I came back," he confirmed, holding her as if the world were about to end. Then he knelt down to be at eye level with the boy, who watched him with a mixture of curiosity and shyness. "Ethan," Hector said, his voice choked, "I'm your father." The boy looked at him, then at the small wooden sparrow Hector held in his hand. It was identical to the one his mother had always shown him, saying it was his father's promise. "Mommy said sparrows always come back to the nest," Ethan said finally. "And so does your father," whispered Hector, holding his son for the first time. The weeks that followed were a dream. The entire town gathered around the builder who had triumphed in Chicago. There were feasts, food, and reunions. Hector got to know his son for real. He taught him how to sand wood, told him about Chicago, took him fishing in the creek. They were golden days where happiness was as tangible as the cornbread coming out of my mother's oven. But in the quiet of the night, Hector and Lucy talked about the future. "We can't stay, Lucy," he said one evening, looking at the wood-burning stove. "In Chicago, I built a life for us, a business, a future. That's where our life is now." She knew, and even with her heart aching at the thought of leaving home again, she agreed. "Where you go, we go. This time, all 3 of us together." The day of departure was different. There was no despair, only hope. As the truck pulled away, Hector held his family close. This time, he didn't look back with pain, but forward with determination. Finally, after so long, his world was complete.
The return to Chicago was different. This time, Hector didn't arrive alone with a suitcase of dreams, but with his family and a solid amount of savings. With the success of the Plainsman's Hearth and the carpentry shop, he had saved enough to invest. Within a few years, his business vision and tireless work had earned him a respectable fortune. It was during this time of prosperity that Silas entered his life. A city man with an easy smile and convincing chatter, he became a regular at the eatery. He introduced himself as a broker, a friend who admired Hector's determination. "Buddy, you're living proof that hard work is the only path to success," Silas would say, clapping him on the shoulder. "A man like you should be thinking about making your money work for you, about securing your family's future." Trust was built gradually. Silas always arrived with opportunities, a piece of land about to appreciate in value, a commercial spot in an up-and-coming neighborhood. Hector, with the caution of a Plainsman, initially invested only small sums. The returns came,
steady and generous. The initial wariness turned into blind trust. Nearly 10 years passed like this. Ethan grew into a young man who now helped with the family businesses. Lucy, though always with one foot in nostalgia for her homeland, had put down roots in Chicago. It was then that Hector, his hair now graying, made the long-awaited decision. "It's time to go home," he announced one evening, "to enjoy our land in the time we have left." They sold everything in a hurry, like people seeing the end of a long journey. Only a few final properties and a sum of saved money remained. It was then that Silas offered, with his usual smile, "Don't you worry about a thing, my friend. I'll stay here and handle everything for you. With the power of attorney you give me, I'll sell what's left and send the money to the Plains. It's the least I can do for you after so many years of friendship." Hector, blinded by the emotion of returning home and by a decade of apparent loyalty, signed the documents without the slightest suspicion. He handed over to Silas not just his trust, but the fruit of an entire lifetime of work. Their farewell in Chicago was sweet. They believed they were closing the perfect chapter of their lives. As the train pulled away, Hector held Lucy and Ethan, believing the worst was behind them. He didn't know that the deepest betrayal was traveling with them, hidden in those signed documents, waiting for the right moment to strike.
The first letter was sent a month after they arrived in the town. Hector calmly asked about the progress of the transactions. There was no response. The second letter, a month later, was a little more urgent. Again, there was no response. The third, the fourth, weeks turned into months. A silence as heavy as a tombstone began to settle in Hector's heart. Lucy watched him reviewing again and again the copies of the property documents, the power of attorney he had given to Silas. "Something must have happened, Hector," Lucy tried to calm him. "A delay at the banks, perhaps." But in her eyes, Hector saw the same fear he felt. Finally, after 6 months of anguish, a letter arrived. It wasn't from Silas, but from a former customer of the carpentry shop, an honest man from Chicago. "Dear Hector, I write with a heavy heart. There are rumors here. Rumors that Silas sold all your properties in the name of a company owned by his family. I hear he bought a ranch and is spending money lavishly. I fear, Hector, that you may have been swindled." The letter fell from Hector's hands. The world stopped. It wasn't a delay. It was a calculated, cold betrayal, carried out over years by a man who had pretended to be a friend. "This can't be!" he screamed for the first time in his life, with a pain that tore at his soul. "I gave him my trust. I gave him everything." That night, in front of the wood-burning stove, he made the most difficult decision. He had to go back to Chicago. There was no other way. It was his money, yes, but it was much more. It was the fruit of a lifetime of sacrifice, of years away from his family, of sleepless nights. It was the future he had promised to Lucy and Ethan. "I have to go," he said, his voice hoarse from screaming and crying. "I have to face him." Lucy, with tears in her eyes,
could only nod. She knew she couldn't hold him back. She knew honor and justice were calling. Hector left again, but this time there was no hope in his eyes, only a fierce determination and a profound pain. As the truck pulled away, Lucy, standing in the dust of the road, felt a coldness in her heart that didn't come from the evening chill.
The return to Chicago was a ghostly journey. Where Hector once saw opportunity, he now only saw the scenery of his own naivety. Every street, every building he had helped erect reminded him of the years of work Silas had stolen from him. He hadn't come to negotiate. He had come to reclaim what was his by law and by right. Yet, his first destination wasn't the county clerk's office or Silas's office. Guided by a longing stronger than rage, he walked to the old address of the Plainsman's Hearth. The business was closed, a for rent sign in the window, but through the dusty glass, his gaze locked on to the small wooden sparrow he himself had carved, which still hung, solitary and faithful, behind the counter his hands had built. It was there that Silas found him. He arrived accompanied by two tough-looking men, surprised to see him contemplating that piece of his past. "Came back for the bird," Silas said, with a disdain that cut to the soul. "It's the only thing left for you." Hector didn't even turn. His voice emerged as a serene and deep whisper, laden with a truth no document could nullify. "I came to remind you, Silas, that a promise made under a mesquite tree isn't broken with a notary's paper. You may have stolen my money, but my name is etched into every piece of furniture that left my workshop, into every foundation of these streets I helped build. That is something you can never take from me." There was no physical confrontation, no trap in a dark alley, just the icy understanding that some men prefer to stab you in the back. That same night, on the banks of the Chicago River, Hector disappeared forever, becoming just another whisper among the pollution and the silence of the city. His body was never found. He was just another migrant, swallowed by the broken dream of a better life. In the small town, time passed with the leaden weight of absence. Lucy and Ethan waited for years. Letters, trips to Chicago, searches, all in vain. Hector had become a ghost, a story the elders told in hushed tones so as not to tempt fate. Ethan grew up and became a carpenter, like his father. In his workshop, he hung the original wooden sparrow, the one that Hector had carved for Lucy. Lucy, now elderly, spent her afternoons gazing down the dirt road, not with sadness, but with the quiet certainty that one day, somehow, the plains would give back what it had taken. And on windy nights, when the strong gusts swayed the mesquite trees around the town, some swore they could hear the echo of a promise made so long ago. "I will come back, even if I have to walk through fire." And so, between sighs and silences, we reach the end of this story. The lives of Hector, Lucy, and Ethan become an echo traveling from the plains to Chicago, reminding us that love and betrayal often walk the very same road. If this tale has touched your soul, don't forget to subscribe to A Coffee and a Story to join us for the next voices, the next destinations. We want to know, from which corner of the world are you listening? Tell us in the comments. Every shared coffee is an invisible thread that binds us through stories. Thank you for your time, for your companionship, and for choosing to spend this moment listening. Until the next story and the next coffee.